In this video, I would like to talk about a new library that I made called Flowshow, and how it has this one decorator that is kind of over the top, but strangely useful too. It's all the result of a recreational programming session, so what I'm about to show isn't necessarily something that you should use in production, but I do think that the decorator is interesting enough to just make a little video about it, partially to show you how you can maybe rethink functions and tasks in Python, because we can do some fancy things with nested hierarchies, but also because I think the implementation of it might open up a likable pattern that's reusable elsewhere as well. So let's first just dive into what the library does, and then we can talk a little bit about how it's made. Right, so I am inside of a Marimo notebook now, and you can see that I have this library called Flowshow, and it's importing this task over here. Task is a decorator, so that is basically a function that I can wrap around another function, and that's also what I'm doing over here. I've got my add task, and this task decorator is effectively just wrapping around this function over here. Now, what the decorator internally is doing is it's actually turning this function into an object that can track a little bit of state. And whenever this function is called, it is going to store some information. Things like how long the function ran, and it's also going to keep track of some of the logs. That's kind of the idea. This task decorator is also made in such a way that you could add some extra behavior if you wanted to. So there's a retry mechanic that you can configure. You can say, if I see a specific error, then I want to retry, and you can also specify how many retry attempts you're going to do. This function in particular is designed to maybe fail sometimes. So there's a if random.random is less than 0.5, then we are going to be raising an error. So retrying 10 times should fix this, right? But this is a function that's going to fail often. Down below here, I've got another function that I'm turning into a task, but this one is interesting because what it's doing is it is actually reusing other functions that are tasks. So this might fail over here. That's something that's being used right there. And this function over here is being used internally over here. And we're going to see this in more detail in a bit, but you can kind of see a bit of hierarchy. I have one task that has children tasks, and the whole point is that each task will also track its children. Then when I scroll down, there's one more task definition, I guess you could say, and that is this main job function. The whole point of this function over here is just to be an entry point. So there's this one function that's going to call all the other things is the idea. And I suppose the final thing that's good to pay your attention to is that at the end over here, I am actually using a for loop. So this task over here that, as we mentioned, had some nested bits to it, that is going to be ran in sequential a couple of times. So just to be clear, up until here, we have just been defining tasks. We've not really been doing much more fancy stuff than that. But then at this call over here, you can run the function as you would normally. So you can assign a variable and all that stuff is fine. But then by running this task, that's where all the state collection and logging also starts to happen. And your intuition might be to think, well, oh, I'm just calling a function over here and it's meant to feel like that. But that is no longer a function. That is actually more of a task object, so to say. Now, when you scroll down a little bit, you can actually see some output appear as well. That's because the retry mechanic got triggered, and I'm using a library under the hood called Stamina that handles that logic. Stamina, by the way, is a really cool library. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. It has good taste. But the main thing I would like to point your attention to at this point is that this main job object over here, notice it has properties. So every time you run this main job, there is this last run property that will update. In fact, every time you run the function, I am going to make sure that every function run is actually stored. And there's a lot of information here, actually. We can kind of explore that by scrolling. So the last run, that is a task run object. So that describes some state of the function call. There's some sort of a name for the task. We can also see that it started at a certain point. It ended at a certain point. We have some duration information. I think I also store the inputs, as well as the output of the function that could be useful for later. But then you can also see that we store something else. We store the subtasks. So that's the bit where if a task has a child, that is then also added to the state, so to say. So that's something that I'm just totally keeping track of. And what I hope you can imagine is that from here, like, okay, we have kind of this object, right? We've got this task run object, but you do a bunch of for loops and you unnest it, and you can then turn that into either a big Python dictionary or a data frame or what have you. So that is also something that you can go ahead and do. There is a toDataFrame method that you can call, and that is going to take the most recent run of that function, and it's just going to show you all the tasks that ran that were part of it. So you can see there's a main job call. It started somewhere, it ended somewhere, it had a total duration. And then you can also see that inside of that main job, there was this sequence function that ran at some point. And you can also see that all of these tasks, they generated some logs. And those are all accessible as well. Now, if you're using a Marimo notebook in particular, I want to just highlight this one really cute thing that you can do with this. And there we go. I also have to zoom out a bit, but the essence that I'm about to show you is we just had the data frame, and I'm turning that into a chart over here. And this is just an Altair chart, and it's a durations thing. So you can see we've got the main entry point over here that takes a fair amount of time. But we also saw that for loop in the beginning that had a sort of parent task and then two nested tasks under it. This would be the first for loop, just from glancing at it. This would be the second one, and this would be the third one. So we can definitely see, you know, kind of a nice duration pattern. And there are these moments when some functions just feel a bit more, and then there's retry mechanics, etc. But the Marimo thing, right? You can make a Altair object inside of Marimo, and if you want to, you could then choose to wrap it with this Marimo UI Altair chart function. Altair chart goes in, and what goes out is also an Altair chart, but it's more reactive. When you hover over and when you select an element, that can trigger an update in another cell. And this particular notebook is configured that if I make a selection, that the logs can then appear below. So if I was interested, for example, in, I don't know, this one task over here that happened, I can click it, and the moment that I do, you can see that the logs appear. So the logs that are relevant for this task, they appear down below. And in this case, it's all relatively basic, but you can imagine if this was maybe a larger task, that being able to just sort of quickly click around is actually kind of nice and pragmatic. And I can almost kind of imagine this artifact that you can generate from like a Flowshow script that if you ever wanted to debug it, like these kinds of artifacts can be generated along with it. And that just feels kind of interesting. Like there's something about that I felt was worth diving into. Now, there's one extra Marimo trick that is useful in regards to this library, but before mentioning that, I kind of want to just talk a little bit about the implementation here. Because what is actually happening under the hood is whenever I attach a task to a function like so, like the way that this works internally, is you can kind of imagine that I have this class, and let's call that a task. I don't know if I call that internally like this, but let's call it a task. And what I can do from there is I can basically say, well, in my init, right, some sort of function goes in, and some other stuff goes in as well, but I can sort of do the self.func equals func thing. So that means that this might fail function over here, that is something that I can just attach to some object to call later. And then I can also attach a dunder call to the object, maybe with some args and quargs. And then internally, I have self.func available to me. I can just pass the args and quargs along. And yeah, I can just run the original function as I would normally, but I can also do all sorts of stuff around it. So I could do a time there and a time there, and then that's a nice way to keep track of time and know the duration of the function. I could also maybe do something clever with a context manager that wraps around all of this, such that I can capture all the output and the logs, and that is also stored somewhere. And what you can also imagine is that this task function would have like a runs list, so to say. And every time that I call the function, then I'm just going to append something to self.runs. I believe I call it a task description. So that's a description of the job that just ran. And it's basically just a bunch of logs, but that task description object itself can also have runs, and that can also refer to its children. And that's basically the whole trick of being able to sort of have a very general task decorator that you can just attach anywhere, and then it immediately can detect the hierarchy, so to say. Like that's the main reasoning and the main trick. If you're interested to learn more, Flowshow is up on GitHub, and you can also just totally check the implementation from there. Feel free to open up an issue if you think I've made a mistake. I might have another look at this library because it feels like I could maybe do some cool visualization stuff with it. But for now, it's just been a very fun hackathing that I made like a week ago. So I hope this was interesting. Now, one final thing I do want to mention, just as a feature, partially of Marimo, partially of this library, is you'll notice that this GitHub repository comes with a bit of documentation. There's a GitHub pages that I've attached over here. When you click that link, you're going to see a loading screen, and after that, you're going to see a Marimo notebook. And it immediately starts running, by the way. You can also see the little time dial over there. But what is happening here? Well, I made a notebook that is pretty good for demos. That's the notebook I just showed you. But the cool thing is that a Marimo notebook can actually compile to a self-contained static HTML page. It's going to take way too long to explain all the different details here, but in short, there is this thing called WASM that basically allows you to compile code and then run that in the front end. And there's been this big effort to get Python to run in the front end this way, and we're kind of here. So that actually means that for a lot of my very small hobby projects, you can actually go ahead and make docs that are fully interactive appear as a just simple static GitHub pages. So if you're interested to give this thing a spin, you don't even have to download it. You can just go to the repository and just have a play with it from the notebook itself. That's totally cool and doable now. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that. Small disclaimer though that I do feel like I should mention. I am going to be joining the Marimo team like soon, probably next week. I've been using Marimo for a while and I was pretty impressed. So I joined the Discord and at some point the ball got rolling and it's looking like I might be one of their first full-time employees. So definitely looking forward to that. But I do feel like I should disclaim that a little bit because yes, I am a Marimo fanboy. I was a fan of Marimo before I joined. But yeah, I'm going to be on the payroll soon. So feel free to take some of this advice with a grain of salt. If you are interested in Marimo as well, though, know that Calmcode has a course for free. So if you're interested in learning how Marimo is just a bit different, this will be a really good place to start. Another really good place to start soon is also the Marimo YouTube channel. You can imagine that I'm going to add stuff to that thing pretty soon. So yeah, I hope Flowshow is interesting and that people might give it a look. And thanks for listening.